It's a bird emergency. We're doing a bit of a quick update on this little episode. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. Joining me right there is Kylie Soanes, and Kylie's a scientist with a special interest in urban biodiversity and has been working on something that I've always been interested in. How do we get more nest boxes into the environments where we've spent 150 years getting rid of all of the old, awful, untidy trees that have spaces for wildlife to live in? How do we undo the damage? Hi, Kylie. Thanks for checking in with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Kylie, we'll concentrate on replacing habitat that's been lost, specifically opportunities for nesting and roosting those animals, particularly birds that need hollows. What have you been working on that's been making a bit of a difference in our cityscapes?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that I've got a few good projects on the go, both about trying to protect the big old habitat trees that we already have, because we know how important that is, because we know how long they take to replace once they're lost. Many gum trees, it's 300 years plus before they even start to provide good real estate in terms of hollows for the animals that we need. So ways that we can protect and keep the trees that we have, ways that we can look to trees that originally maybe we skipped over. So a lot of our non-native street trees actually provide hollows that wildlife can use, especially critters like possums and red-rumped parrots. And traditionally we would have just gone, oh no, that's a plain tree, there's nothing valuable there. But sometimes these can offer novel habitats. And I guess the third thing is, how do we get our hands dirty and actually make these new habitats ourselves? And I have an excellent PhD student who is trying to think outside the box a little bit and create structures that cater to some of our more picky wildlife in terms of what kind of hollows that they need.
Okay, who's picky and how are you getting, or how are you catering to those wildlife with a fetish?
Yes, the fussy ones, the wicked problems. So often the really hard ones are the big ones. So in Melbourne, we have powerful owls, which are as powerful as their name suggests. They're really large, but this means that they need big hollows, like enormous hollows that can fit an owl that's, you can't even see my hands, close to 1/2 metre bigger high, and the young that they want to raise. That requires a lot of space. And trying to build a nest box that can fit all of that space and not be so heavy that we can't even get it up a tree in the first place is really difficult. So some of the amazing people that work in the School of Design and Architecture are thinking a bit more about animals as clients. What kind of design features do they need in their house? What kinds of materials that we can use other than heavy wood in a box with a hole cut in it that might allow us to have structures that are lighter, easier to place in the trees, big enough for the species, and better mimic the ecology of a hollow, have all those nooks and crannies and delightful little design features that wildlife need.
That's a really good approach. How did the approach or the contact with the architecture students happen? Were they like that client-focused, that end-user-focused process is one that is it's pretty unique. Like people have always said, here's a nest box, now use it.
Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be smaller? What size should the hole be and where should it be? Yeah.
So did you or some of your students approach architecture students or working architects to solve the problem? Or did they come to you with, hey, we think we could do something here? How did that come about?
Yeah, they came to us. So there are heaps of architects and designers that are thinking about ecological problems all the time. And what was really interesting to us is once we eventually met up and started working together is that we've both been travelling alongside, tackling the same problem but coming from different perspectives. And once we're able to work together and get all of those perspectives working on the same problem, it's just opened up a whole lot more opportunities. So I can work with them to bring in more ecological background and urban ecology science. And they have this way of thinking about animals as clients and the kinds of materials and techniques, really advanced computer-aided design and manufacturing and 3D printing that as an ecologist, it's just not anything that's ever occurred to me. So it's allowed us to really explore a new space and a new way of thinking about this.
And if we're brutally honest about it, architecture firms have actual human clients who've got a lot more money than anybody working in the conservation space. So, and it's nice that maybe some of the developers that have been originators of problems perhaps in the past can now be solvers of problems, especially in the urban and suburban environments.
Yeah, absolutely. Science, engineering, architecture, all of these disciplines are about solving problems and finding the right solution. But we just all have different skill sets and different backgrounds. So by being able to work together, it's been really exciting. Difficult at times because you feel like you're speaking an entirely different language, but really exciting. I think it's worth pointing out that having an architect specifically design a hollow that needs to be 3D printed in a specific way, that's not always going to be the solution. Nest boxes, when they do work, are a perfectly good solution, but there are some species that they're just not being successful for. I think for a powerful owl, there are no records of successful nesting, and in some cases they're getting so desperate to try and find ways that we can create artificial hollows for them that they were using old rubbish bins, like that's the size that we're talking, and trying to convert them into something that an owl would use. That to me is probably not an ideal solution. And if we can come up with a way to build something that's sustainable and that meets all the needs that the owl has, as well as being able to fit well to the tree. This is something in an urban environment, if you're going to be sticking great big heavy things up in trees and there's a risk of falling, councils are not really keen on that. Either are the people that have to walk underneath them. So the beautiful thing about the way that these nest boxes are designed is that they're also designed to specifically mould to the trees in their environment. So they don't need to be nailed in. They don't have a lot of hooks and braces and heavy equipment. They actually sit quite neatly on the branch structure of the specific tree that they were designed for, which makes them really handy in an urban environment because then the tree doesn't get damaged as well.
We've missed a marketing opportunity there. They're not handy. They're not handy. They're bespoke.
They're bespoke.
Right. So what's the advance? We've talked about the design a little bit, and I want to come back to that in a minute if we can. But what's the advantage in terms of materials working with people in design and construction? You've been using something new. Tell us about that.
Yeah, look, I'm going to be honest, the specifics of the materials is starting to get right on the edge of my knowledge, but we tried two different designs, and one was sort of 3D printed wood in these little Lego cubes, basically, that fit together and can be assembled really well without adhesives or nails or anything like that. And the other one is hempcrete, which is a material that I certainly have never worked before, but I think for me, the benefit of working with people who are expert and aware of all these different materials is we can try and look for something that's cost effective and that insulates really well, that's porous and drains really well, that's non-toxic and also sustainable in the long term. We can design things that have a longer lifespan than a traditional nest box, and also when they break down, they're not leaving harmful plastics or wastes. And they're the kinds of things that we're trying to think about a little bit more now than we traditionally have. With
taking the bespoke path where you're able to deal with people with high computer-aided design skills to really nail down, to really zoom in on certain design features. Has that aided in keeping pest species out of the boxes? We've always talked about the common myna, the Indian myna, and starlings and sparrows making big fire traps because they pull in so much grass. But does it mean that you can really nail down a box that for instance, owls, particular owls, but that you can keep cockatoos and lorikeets out of?
That's a really good question. It's not something that we've tackled yet, and we've only been able to put out a handful of these bespoke designer hollows for a little while so far. So we don't have the data to really look at that, but it certainly is something that you could start to bring in. The way that we've tried to keep species out of traditional nest boxes, we've tried so many creative things, putting carpet on the inside or baffles or hidden entrances that are this way or that way or the other. Some people swear by having it sloped on this much of an angle facing an east wind. We're trying so many different ways. This is just one more thing that we can try to make sure that the things that we're designing are being used by the species that need them the most.
And then there's the question that always gets asked, how are you going to pay for that? How does a bespoke 3D printed Lego-style nest box stack up in cost compared to the conventional four-sided lump of wood with a sloping roof?
Yeah, definitely more expensive. Definitely more expensive than slapping 6 bits of wood together and cutting a hollow in it, which, as I say, that sounds very disparaging of the humble nest box that is doing a good job for so many species. I guess the thing, and slower, that they take a lot longer to build. Then men's sheds and community groups can smash out a whole bunch of traditional nest boxes in a day, and that's a really good exercise. I guess the things to keep in mind are we're talking about species that aren't using the methods that we're already trying. So you could build 100, 1,000 traditional nest boxes and still not have powerful owls in them. So if this is actually achieving our goal, then it's a step in the right direction. And as my PhD student put it the other day, a couple of days is still a hell of a lot faster than the 300 years it's going to take a tree to mature and form the natural hollow that's required.
That's right. And there's so many approaches now, like with chainsaw hollows into living trees, the traditional hollows, the PVC pipes, the million, maybe 15 or 20 different approaches that are taken, that perhaps it's a learned behaviour for some species, that they have to get used to these things in the environment before they'll try them. So it's maybe not a failure if no one's used it for 2 years. Maybe after, what do powerful owls live, 50 years, 60 years? So just because they're around, they might not be breeding until they're 20. So maybe it's going to take 15 years of passing this thing on the side of a tree before they're even going to be interested in using it. So we have to get hundreds, if not thousands of these out there, don't we? So that we give them the opportunity. I know.
And the things, sorry, I was just going to say new things always start out more expensive as well. This is a new technique, and part of what we're trying to do is not necessarily say this is the way that nest boxes should be built in the future, but encourage people to explore new materials, new ways of building things, new ways of thinking about how we share our urban habitats with wildlife. And there could be new materials that are so cheap and so beautifully insulated that they'll suddenly make this a much easier task. But monitoring is really important. Evaluating how well these things work is really important. It's one thing to come up with a creative new thing to try, but if we're not carefully measuring and evaluating them, then it's not really, you can't call it a success. So far we've been testing how well they handle temperature changes and maintaining the internal humidity, and all of those things are being monitored as we speak, basically, and we hope to be getting some good results from those soon. But preliminary data shows that they are maintaining a good internal temperature compared to a natural hollow and a chainsaw hollow. So that's really good news.
Have you got any idea how many of these boxes are being used? Like, is there a percentage success rate that you've been? I know it's really early days, so it's hard to tie it down, but I imagine that maybe there's only a dozen or so of them out there. So are most of them being frequented by someone desirable?
Yeah, most of them have been. We've had species checking them out. We're still going. So we actually had acoustic monitors in them, and we're still going through all that data to listen to who was inside the boxes. No powerful owls yet. I definitely know that. But there have been possums and lorikeets and galahs investigating them and being in them. Whether or not they've actually then taken the step to nest and produce successful young is the next thing that we need to check, because ultimately that's what we want. They're for breeding. That's what we want to see.
That's right. And I mean, it's really interesting. I'm in the same city as you, and I'm always encouraged when I see new birds in the city, but at the same, on the other hand, some of them are not the birds you would prefer to be in the cities. Like it's amazing how many sulphur-crested cockatoos have come into Melbourne, but they're big birds, so that means they're driving out other birds, and I imagine a pair of cockatoos moving into a large nesting hollow absolutely deter a pair of powerful owls, because cockatoos are noisy and can be, they're not bullies in the same way that lorikeets are, but cockatoos hang out in flocks of maybe 15, 20, 30. So even when they're breeding, they're still in a group. They're not. Yeah,
they're pretty cantankerous.
Yeah, well, they know how to use their bulk, and it's a pretty nasty bite they've got too. So, Kylie, I know you're really under the pump today, but I'd love to get you back and talk about red rump parrots in the city, because I love watching my local red rumps and trying to understand their movements, because they're not here all the time. They do breed nearby, but I don't know where they go. So I'd love to solve that mystery with you.
Well, actually, if they're breeding nearby and you know about it, I have a master's student who would love to hear about that. So we're trying to understand what makes a good home for a red rump parrot, what kind of hollow. So if you head on over to his website.
Send me that and I'll publicise that. I haven't been able to find out where they nest, but there are at least two pairs who nest close to my place. I see the group or the two groups frequently, and just after all the young have fledged, they all hang out together in this small group. Then they disappear and I don't see them again until maybe another 4 or 5 months now they might be around, but just solo or in pairs, and I don't notice them as much, and they're not feeding where I hang out. Yeah, they're
a nice little bird to have in the city.
They are. But they don't do much. That's why people don't notice them. They don't do much at all. And I really want you on another occasion, Kylie, to tell us all about the superb blue wren, the fairy wren project that you've got going, and of course we've got to talk about Dame Edna. That's a teaser for next time. Kylie, what should people do if they see birds, be it owls or parrots that they don't know, they can't identify, maybe using hollows? Is there somebody who wants to know about this data in the suburbs?
Oh, you can. I'll just give you my mobile number. No.
There's so many studies going on.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering that apart from the sort of annual bird count, that collects sightings, but are there people wanting to know about where birds are nesting and utilising in the suburbs?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the Hollows as Homes project is a really good one to go to. So they're trying to bring all of that information together and be a place where people can report their hollow sightings and learn a little bit more about how hollows functions as homes for wildlife and what people might be able to do in their own area to make better homes for wildlife. Depending on where you live, definitely check out your local councils. So councils like the City of Melbourne run, I think, annually hollow blitzes where citizen scientists can go out with them and search all of the hollows and see what's nesting in them and contribute to data that way that helps them manage those urban spaces better for wildlife and maybe the kind of wildlife that you want and less of the kind of wildlife that you don't. Yeah, there's lots of really great initiatives.
Okay, so Hollows as Homes, check that out. I'll put all the links. I'm sure Kylie will put me in touch with some people who would like to use the data, if in Melbourne particularly. And I'm looking forward to talking to Kylie next time because hopefully we can do this semi-regularly and find out what's going
That would
on
be amazing.
in the city. Kylie, I don't know if you're up with it, but Holly's back every second Monday this year to talk about birds in backyards and however else we can jam that together. And we've got on the 28th. On the 28th, we're talking cockatoos, brush turkeys, and bin chickens. Yeah. Well, actually, we've got John, of course, Dr. John Martin, who's our go-to cockatoo behaviour man. But there's somebody in the UK who's been studying cockatoo behaviour. I'm going to wedge her in as well with John and Holly. So you're more than welcome to join us on any of our regular Mondays too, because you've got lots of things to talk about. Been fantastic. This is what are we going to call this segment? Shortcuts? I don't know. That sounds too generic, doesn't it? Wedgies. It's a small wedge. The snippet. We'll work on that. We'll come up with something groovy and great, Kylie. Thanks for talking to us. Kylie, of course, is at the University of Melbourne, which I neglected to say in the introduction. Well, you didn't even put Dr. Kylie on your your name badge there. But there we go. With hard-hitting science, we always try and deliver on the bird emergency. Thanks so much, Kylie. It's been fun, and I look forward to talking about red rumps and fairy wrens in our next instalment.
Sounds perfect.
Thanks for watching and listening, everyone. I'm Grant Williams. This has been the Bird Emergency. See ya.